Welcome everybody here. I'm the project manager for the Regional Building Damage Assessment Project, which is sponsored by RDPO. And one of the activities we attempted to do in that project was to organize a regional GIS work group, because there's a lot of things affecting GIS that are emergency management related. And for various reasons, some of them political, we were not successful in starting a regional GIS work group, though that is probably still in the works. But we did want to share this, this damage assessment application that the city of Portland has developed over the last few years, hoping that it would be relevant to some folks and that people could leverage the work that Paul has and Diego and others have done. So I'm just going to take you through a couple introductory slides, and then we'll get right in, let Paul get right into it. I'm going to just tell you a little bit about the building safety evaluation process and ORSAP, which is being developed. And then if you have a quick chance to read this here, you can see that Paul's going to kind of talk about the app itself, and Diego's going to talk about some of the questions that we had to deal with, or some of the questions that you'd have to deal with if you wanted to do this. And Darren's going to talk about what it was like training the building safety evaluators on using this app. So Diego is the Portland, it's corporate GIS. Thanks, Diego. He's the manager at BTS, which is the city's IT. And he came to Portland after 20 years of experience in a bunch of other places in all sorts of geospatial roles. So, and Paul Cohn, I don't know, if I could see your faces, I'd ask how many of you already know him, because he's kind of the granddaddy I think of as for GIS in this region, has worked with so many folks that are involved with GIS here. So he's the analyst that does most of the emergency management stuff on the city's corporate GIS team. And Darren Wegner is my amazing colleague whose face you see at the top of the screen, who came to the Bureau of Development Services, where I work, from BOEC, which is the 911, and he is a trainer and works mainly in emergency management, and is my right-hand person that I rely on to have good judgment in all things. So with that, I'm just going to get into kind of the background of why we have this app and why we need it. So I think it's accepted in this area that all jurisdictions are responsible to complete a rapid damage assessment for their buildings. Now, rapid has a special meaning. People talk about a windshield survey that often fire or some other group will do, or drones might do it, or you might crowdsource it. It's not that. Rapid is an assessment that is done external to the building. It maybe takes 15 or 30 minutes. And for buildings, it follows the guidance of ATC 20. So I'm going to say a little bit more about that in a minute, but it's a very short evaluation, and the goal of it is this building safe to enter? So building, and the result of that evaluation is one of these three placards. So the evaluation is really about, is the building safe to go in, not just is it structurally safe. For instance, there might be a building next door that is not safe, and it means that the building you're looking at can't be considered safe either, because that other building might fall on it. So that's important to know. And when this quick, rapid external evaluation is done, then one of these three placards gets put on that building. And inspected means we think it's okay for people to go in, and restricted might mean that there are certain conditions or times of the day that you could go in, and unsafe really means this either needs to be demolished or completely fixed. So that's basically the app that Paul's going to show us is meant to do this process online. Like there are still really green and yellow and red placards that you put on buildings, but the internal information that goes into the city system so that we know how many buildings have been placarded and how many are unsafe and how many are in which category, and we understand how to tie it to permitting. That's the app that Paul's going to talk about. So I just want to say one other thing. It takes some qualifications to be able to evaluate buildings, and that ATC 20 earthquake assessment, they don't certify anybody. They just have a field manual, which you'll see pictures of in some of the other slides, that tells you what to look for. And then there's training for how to do that. But usually there's a state program that wraps around that training. So California has one, Washington has one, and Oregon is just now developing it. Chris Wong, who's on here, has worked a lot with Dave Terry's to develop this ORSAP training module, which is a way of, it's not about the structural safety, it's about how our state, Oregon, or how Washington in WASAFE, how they get the database of who's credentialed to do this, how they'll get deployed, making sure that they have the credentials they say they have, things like that. So that program is under development right now. We've been working on a lot in this year. My project has supported it, and other people like Chris, out of the goodness of his heart, has supported it. So that's the system that this app would get used within when it's up and running, and that's very close to happening. So now if I can figure out how to unscreen share, which I've practiced quite a bit, I'm going to turn this over to Paul to take it away and discuss the app itself.
Okay, great. So yeah, this project actually goes back a little bit more than a few years. This is kind of something I started on several years ago, and then kind of we put it on the back burner, and then Anne came along in the last couple of years, and we worked to try and make a larger project out of it. And I think we've had some success in that. Obviously, not the full. We don't have a regional GIS work group on this. But I have several images on here just to show, we started in an ECC with back in Portland Hills exercise 2014, and there were some asks, and that was the first time I had heard about ATC 20. They're like, we're supposed to evaluate the buildings, and we're supposed to type all the information into this form, and it's this paper form, and I was like, what? And there was a lot of like scrambling to do it on paper. And it was like, no, we need to computerize this in some way. So we went through some iterations of using Collector for ArcGIS, and then now Explorer and Survey 123, and then even a dashboard. So I'm going to hopefully explain how all that is working. All right. So yes, ATC 20, this is what the form looks like. It's a one-page form. There's not a terrible amount of complexity to it. This would not lend itself easily to just be translated straight to like a form that looked just like this on your screen. So we translated it to mobile, which includes a couple things. First of all, we use ArcGIS Explorer. Probably at some point we'll transition that to Field Maps because Explorer is going to be deprecated soon. And then Field Maps is a newer Esri mobile application on your phone. And then we also use Survey 123, which is a very form-centric mobile app that Esri is going to continue to develop. Let's see. So ATC 20, that form I showed you before, translates into something like this. You can have, with exterior or exterior interior. And Anne, I know you said exterior, but I'm just have replicated what is currently on the form. Building name, how many stories, type of occupancy, and then what sort of damage has happened. Are there walls falling? Is there a chimney falling? That sort of thing. And then estimated kind of overall building damage is arranged. The actual ATC 20 form, or a flavor of it, wants you to sketch out a building footprint. What we're doing actually is we're allowing the user to take one or more photos, attach them to the report, and then do a posting. And then that happens repeatedly in the field with a bunch of inspectors. And then we take that data, it's in the cloud, in our GIS cloud, and then we can put it on a real-time dashboard and actually see where the buildings are that have been inspected. We could see there's a distinction between inspected buildings that have been inspected in recent inspections. That being, say, if you have an aftershock after an earthquake and you've inspected a building and it's yellow, maybe you, after the big aftershock, you need to go back and re-inspect it again. I'm going to let Ann or Darren talk more about that, but we're accounting for that possibility. And then, you know, by construction type and so forth. Great. Okay, so I've got my building. I'm going to do my inspection, but the question really became for us: what building are we what building are we inspecting again? Now, this is a map of the current map of the PSU campus. I'll call your attention to Broadway and Harrison, this intersection right here, because when we originally did this without a full ATC 20, without the process that we're using now, it looked more something like this. It was a WebEOC board. Anybody remember WebEOC? Portland's not using it anymore, but I know other jurisdictions are continuing to do so. They build a board and then someone could just go in and put a location in. The problem is these are not validated locations. You see here, Broadway and Harrison map, you click and maybe get on the map. But if you go back, Broadway and Harrison, is it this building? Is it this building? Is it this building? Is it this building? So we made a conscious decision to actually start with what we know when we're going to do an inspection, which is we're going to allow the user to pick the building on a map, and then we're going to attach the inspection to that existing building footprint. You see here, this 1001 Southwest Fifth, that's the they call it something else now. That's a building downtown. I didn't actually type that address in there. It won't let me. I need to actually go and have GIS data that has a list, has footprints for all the buildings, and then attach a survey to it. And the way we do that, and this is going to get a little geeky, and some of this stuff is a little bit old in terms of, I did this in ArcMap, but you're setting up a schema for meaning a data structure for buildings that have all the information, and then you're going to set up next to that a parallel sort of schema for the inspection. How many stories below, how many stories above ground, type of construction, all of that, and then you actually put what we call domains in there. So then the user filling out the form can't just write in anything. They have to write something that kind of fits in with what those categories should be. And then you do a relationship class between those two things. You relate, a building can have one or more inspections. So once you've set up that data structure, then you can publish it out as a service. And then from there, and I showed this before in my front slide, then I can pick a building on the map. And then once I pick that building, I can open a form. I've actually got ATC 45 is a similar form from the ATC, Applied Technology Council. It's to be used in windstorms and floods. It's very similar though, but I was able to kind of tack on to the existing work that I did by, at some point we could, if they did need to do an ATC 45, most of this would translate over pretty quickly. All right, so back to our form, we're gonna fill it out. Pretty easy, right? And then, we got some radio buttons here. We can attach some photos. And then we have our dashboard. There's some, and then it's a little more complicated than that. And this is where we get into the workflow. And that is, in order, let's say, like I was saying before, okay, we have a city hall here, or let's pick one that's, say, yellow, this building here. We inspected it, we had an aftershock. How do we make sure that we're showing the most recent inspection on the map? So we have to do some translation between our buildings and our inspections to make sure that the map is showing the most recent inspection. Otherwise, we're not looking at a true picture of what the landscape is for buildings that have been inspected and what the damage is. So I'm going to get into the little geeky stuff a little bit here. We have a data workflow that runs in some Python where we do some querying with the service. We add the new inspections to a table in a local geodatabase, so we could actually do local reporting if we want to, rather than trying to do reporting out of the cloud data that's up there. And then we can also download the photos that are taken into a geodatabase. Some Python scripts do that. You can see I started writing this long ago and I've been updating it more recently. I originally did this with ArcMap, and now have it working with Python 3 and ArcGIS Pro. Querying the REST endpoint for those new inspections. And basically the way that Python is when you're in a situation where you need to do it, it just kind of runs in a loop and it just constantly queries that service and keeps looking for those new inspections and then brings them down into the, and then updates what you would see in the building. So the process is, again, you have that Explorer app on your phone, you grab a building footprint, it takes you over to the form, and then populates the dashboard. And the dashboard actually allows for a little bit of interactivity as well. You could click on a building and it'll zoom to it, and you can get more detailed information about it. And then a bonus, part of what Ann was talking about, and I don't know where it's at currently with ORSAP, is the city has to report to the county, has to report to the state, has to report to FEMA, all the total kind of estimated damage to buildings. And there's some room on this form for other things as well. You see there's like crop loss and livestock loss at the bottom. But FEMA wants you to total up all this money of damages because they need to know, hey, have we hit a certain threshold for a presidential disaster declaration, et cetera, et cetera. So because we've started with our buildings and we have a value or an assessed value for those buildings, we can attempt to do some calculations on really like what amount of damage have we done to this building. If the building's worth $1 million and the assessors and the building safety evaluator says it's 50% damage, then okay, then we've got $500,000 worth of damage to fix. That's just real ballparky. And then I'm gonna let, actually at this point, I'm gonna go to my next slide. And so I'll talk a little bit about, this is kind of our things to work on, where we're hoping this, and these things would be more of a regional in nature, but not necessarily. Number one, and Darren's going to talk a little bit about this, maybe make it easier to log on. As those of you who use ArcGIS, if you don't have a public map, and we wouldn't want this stuff to necessarily be public, we can't have just anybody logging in and doing build inspections. The login process for ArcGIS can be a little confusing, double, because we've got 2 apps to log into. So stepping some people through that is something we're continuing to refine. At some point, we'd like to be able to just go into Survey123 and just pick a building footprint right there. Esri came to town in February last month and did a Survey123 workshop for us, kind of the current state of affairs. I've actually interacted with Esri quite a bit on this app, this workflow over several years, and they paid attention and they're giving us some ideas and done some improvements. And they're hinting that eventually maybe you'll be able to actually open up a map on Survey123 and select a feature out of your map and then do something with it in the survey. The base map, in order to update to have a real true base map, we're not just using the footprints, we're doing some value added, and that we're adding some additional fields to each footprint, empty fields for each footprint, and then also doing some calculations of what the value of the building could be based on the assessor's information from the county tax assessor. Think about if you've got a tax lot that has 3 buildings on it, and you've only got 1 assessed value from the tax lot data. How do you decide, okay, this building's worth, this amount, this building's worth that amount, this building's worth that amount? We're doing some real rough calculations based on just area. The building footprint this building is this percentage of total footprint, that sort of thing. And then an offline base map. Ideally, my phone would be ready to go at any time with Survey123. And if the earthquake comes and then all of a sudden all the cell networks are down, I would still be able to go out and do inspections offline and then later bring those back to a central command post and sync via Wi-Fi back to wherever the data is. Esri tells us that Apple will not let people push data to an iPhone like that. But anyway, all right, Diego, I'm going to pass the next slide to you, and I did kind of touch on some of that a little bit, but I'll let you elaborate on it, and I'll run.
Yeah, thank you, Paul, and welcome, all of you. Things to work on, determining a better method for calculating the value of a damage. Currently, In the city, we are using the tax lot data, which is very messy because you have a lot of footprints in one lot. It doesn't have values for the public owned buildings, and this is what the city use, right? So so each organization or each entity is going to have different different needs and different requirements to provide that value. So things that you have to think is, if you want to give cost per the building, okay, how are we going to do that? Do I need a percentage related to the building on that tax lot? What values do I want to use? Just the tax value, the market value, the insurance, if there is other private sources. Some departments, they may have other resources as well. Are we calculating inflation? Those are all questions that you have to bring up within your department, within your groups, and define, right? And also know how it is the reporting system for your organization, right? Like the city, it goes and reports to the county, and then the county to the state, and then the state to the government, right? So, so those are all internal conversation and internal considerations. The goal is to submit these to FEMA to get, to get money, to get money from the government, and FEMA is always gonna have the final cost, and it's gonna be determined what it's how much money do you get. So any next one?
Next slide. There you go.
So other things to think about, it's where do you want to deploy these? It's not like Paul was mentioning, is not plug and play. It needs to be hosted someplace, right? So do you want to host it into an S3 ArcGIS online environment or into an enterprise portal? In here in the city, we deploy it in our enterprise and not in ArcGIS Online, but those are decisions you have to think about it. Depends on what you deploy. You have to allow for how many licenses are you gonna have, because it does require some licensing in your environment. How are you gonna provide access to the external users? So right now, that is one thing that we struggle quite a bit. It's creating accounts for all these external users and how we're gonna manage them. And then how are you going to manage in that content, right? This content, it might have some type of security level, and you might not want to share with other groups, right? So you have to manage all that through your environment. If you want to share data, how are you going to share the data? You're going to share. Are you intending to share the data with other entities and other organizations, or it is going to be an internal, only internally? So there are best practices, but those best practices, you have your own organization, they have to define it. And the best people for emergency managers, the best people that can give you more information are your GIS professionals. So any of the GIS professionals, they know how hard it is to manage ArcGIS Online or the portal environments. So the other part that it touches in the previous items is the integration. This is not, we did deploy it, we had conversations or interest from other entities, and how can we share this application with others, right? Can we merge our data with other entities data? Well, you can share these things. You can share these applications to some level using some other features within Portal with collaborations, but if a city has different reporting process or different standards, the schema changes are not that easy, right? When you publish this, it is pretty locked. It's not something you can start making a lot of changes. So if you are wanting to share this information with other organizations or with at a regional level, like with the city, the county, or the state, you have to engage with those partners and have those conversations on who is going to be hosting it. What it is, the schema that we wanted to use, how do we wanted to standardize the data, and so on. So again, this is not plug and play. It will be great to have standards across different organizations and at regional level, because I think everybody can benefit from this application and this reporting. And right now, we're not in a point where we can share this with all the organizations, but definitely we're happy to share what we've done, and we can help you to configure it and to share what we have done with you. And and we're happy also to engage with any other members to tide our integration and collaboration.
Yeah, and I would also add, Diego, that this is kind of an ask too. If you're interested in this, come talk to us and let's see if we can figure out how to get something working, beyond what we have right now. Maybe Daniel, I know you've been working at the state level to do a survey 123 form that isn't ATC 20, but is a damage assessment app as well. Maybe there's some collaboration we could do, figure out how to share data back and forth and figure out how to be set up for all these things, because we really want it to be ready to go and redundant. And we don't want it to all fall apart when the earthquake happens. And then, oh, well, sorry, there's no cell service, get the paper out. That's just everyone's worst nightmare when you have a database of paper this tall, right? I mean,
But for emergency managers, and that if you talk to any GIS professional or GIS expert in your department, it can really help you with the architecture and how to build a system that you will be able to use in an emergency, and it's reliable. So because when you build these systems on your in the cloud, or it is possible to migrate them and provide access really quickly to people, but you have to configure it. So you can make it as complicated as easy as you want. And we know that when it's an emergency, the best approach is the easy, the better, right? So, but we're happy to have any conversations or any follow-ups, and we are always looking for partners to share this information and hopefully get into a more integrated regional, regional sharing process. So, that's it, Paul. Yeah. So that is our contact information. So you can reach out to us through email, or you can also go to reach out through portlandmaps.com, and there you have more contact information. But yeah.
So I put our questions slide up, but I know that Darren's got a few slides as well. He wants to talk about the training stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing, and then maybe we can have some more time after Darren's done to do some questions. Does that sound good to you, Ann?
Yeah, that's perfect. So take it away, Darren.
Thank you, Ann. Once again, I'm Darren Wagner. I'm a training analyst with the Bureau of Development Services for the City of Portland. There we go. So when Ann and I first started working on this project together, we had a great big vision that we wanted to get all of our building safety evaluators together and kind of go out into the real world and look at real buildings and do real damage assessments on these types of buildings in order to kind of meet some of these learning objectives that you see here. So we wanted them to be able to kind of really get signed into the app, or apps in this case, to be able to use them to practice some of what they've learned in their ATC 20 trainings on how to actually evaluate buildings, and really just to feel more comfortable going through that entire process. So that way, if something like an earthquake were to actually happen, they would actually know what they're supposed to do, rather than kind of trying to remember what that training was that they went to, 3 years ago. They actually kind of knew what they were supposed to go out there and do and had some practice with it. So we put together these learning objectives. But we knew that before we could even kind of start to do these, we needed to make a plan for it. And before we could even start training, we knew that we had about 140 folks at our bureau who were qualified to do these damage assessments. And they were, some of them had never taken ATC 20 or Cal OES training, like to get the knowledge they needed to even start the assessments. And so that was kind of our first preparation goal that we had to go through. We did know that we wanted to actually take some time and train on the applications themselves. Paul mentioned that the sign-on was a little bit confusing. We wanted to get some folks kind of some classroom practice with that before going out and doing that actual practical exercise. We knew that if we went out and did the practical exercise without having some classroom-based training on how to learn and how to use the app, that we'd end up spending the majority of our time just doing that, problem solving, kind of an existing process. We've had some previous exercises at the Bureau in the past where that's pretty much all we did, was everybody came in and signed onto the app for the day, and we never actually got to what we wanted to do. And so we kind of split those out to make sure that we actually had devoted time to getting signed in and practicing, and then going out and doing that practical exercise. And then finally, we wanted to kind of follow up and do some continual drills so those skills wouldn't be lost. So diving a little bit deeper into kind of each of those steps, the first step was obviously the preparation for the training we wanted to do, and that was really key. So there was lots of preparation. We, of course, worked with Paul and his team on the GIS stuff to get the app in the place that we were ready to go with it, and lots of other preparations. But on the training side, really getting everybody up to speed on ATC 20 was where it was at. And so we had to make sure that folks who had taken the class 5 years ago got new certifications, new staff members had gotten it, but we encountered some challenges. As you can imagine, we're all busy folks. The training at the time was longer, and it still is. Sometimes it's anywhere from half a day to 2 days worth of training. So trying to fit that into folks' schedules was hard, especially when we had so many people. We can't just take 70 folks out of our day-to-day and kind of throw them in a training. At different times, the classes had cost money, and that was a concern over different periods of time. Luckily now, most of the classes, folks are able to find grants for and offer them for almost no cost. So that's been really helpful. And then tracking certifications, because we'd kind of piecemealed this all together in order to get it done. We have 140 different training dates, and trying to remember when everybody's due and making sure that they are getting updated certifications and that they're current was also a big part of this process. So one of the things we were able to do was actually host our own kind of Cal OES SAP classes. So California Office of Emergency Services Structural Assessment Program classes that taught that ATC curriculum. And so we were able to offer it to folks in the region as well as our folks to get them, a good chunk of folks trained up at the same time. And then, of course, we took advantage of other folks' training and sent out lots and lots and lots of targeted emails to those folks, encouraging them to try and fit it into their schedules. Luckily, with this, they have most of these classes have moved online or were moved online at the time and virtual, so it was much easier to send our folks to classes. The next step in that process was that applications training. So we wanted to get folks signed in to be able to use both the apps, kind of Explore and Survey 123, like Paul had mentioned earlier, and be able to send a completed evaluation. This wasn't a big class. This was going to be, a shorter class, but we wanted to get the basics all figured out so that way we didn't have to do it when we were in the field. And so probably the biggest challenge with this, and kind of still is maybe our biggest challenge, is that the apps kind of need to be set up and configured and kind of have to be logged into the right location. And so for a lot of our evaluators, kind of remembering different server locations or, exact things to type in wasn't really in their wheelhouse. And so that was really tough for us. This was also during COVID. Staff were largely remote. Even though they were working in the field, they weren't really coming into the office. New equipment was a huge thing as well. As soon as we got folks trained, turned out everybody got new iPads. And then finally, just keeping those permissions updated, adding new folks to that system and making sure that we had everybody assigned the way they needed to be was also a challenge. So we did host these trainings, a lot of these trainings, multiple offerings, both virtual and in person. The in-person ones were definitely most helpful because we were able to bring in extra folks who knew how to get folks signed on. And so we could offer more of that one-on-one help where we're able to look over somebody's shoulder and kind of help guide them through that process. Of course, we made printout guides and offered tons of follow-up. And Paul and the GIS staff, we always had on standby. They were great because if we did have something like a permissions issue, or we thought that we were having trouble with an app or something, being able to very quickly go to them and to get a resolution, or for them to help us find a resolution, was super helpful. But once we got everybody through that applications training, we then were able to kind of do this practical exercise that we had envisioned. So we wanted to use a real world environment and kind of let them apply their ATC knowledge to kind of this form and make sure that they knew how to kind of translate that together. So again, we encountered some challenges. We knew we needed to get everybody through the training, but we also needed to do it, offer this exercise soon enough to where we wouldn't get a bunch of new users and new devices, which we still got, and the knowledge of being signed in and how to use that app was still very current. And so the other problem that we had is that we needed to find buildings we could actually do these evaluations. Not everybody would probably want, 30 or 40 inspectors with the city walking around their building talking about how it's going to fall over in the event of an earthquake. So luckily, we found a great partner in PSU who didn't mind us doing that. And so it worked out great because we are on the Portland State University campus. So we were able to walk to all these places and their public buildings. So we had access all around them. So that was great. And then what we did is, so we actually had these groups of folks come in. We were to walk over to multiple buildings on the PSU campus. And we had a member of our engineering staff actually walk the folks around, and they were able to point out features of the building and how they would likely be damaged in the event of an earthquake, or areas where we could look for damage on these different types of buildings. And so they would point out different kind of features of the building. We'd walk all the way around the building and then allow our inspectors to go back using kind of that knowledge, and they would then input the information into their form. And then afterwards, again, that engineer would lead a discussion on what everybody came up with. Did you rate this red building or a green building or a yellow building, and why? And people would have different results. And so we'd get to have a conversation and hopefully come to a consensus on how a building should be evaluated, which would mean that we would be more consistent as we rated our buildings, hopefully in the future. And then finally, Paul also joined us on these, and as well as myself and Anne, so that way we could provide any support kind of day of. And there were definitely cases where folks had gotten new devices. And so, Anne and I were typing in, passwords and stuff on our way out as we were visiting these buildings. And then lastly, to continue that knowledge, we've continued to push out drills. So we use an Everbridge notification system that sends text messages and emails about once a quarter to folks to say, hey, go ahead and do these evaluations. The idea being that we keep staff current and that they continue to use their ATC experience and training. As we send out these Everbridge notifications, we continue to get challenges. Staff are always getting new devices. We have new staff who haven't even been trained in AC20. So keeping them up to speed has been a challenge. And of course, folks forget how to use the app itself. But what we found is the more and more that we do these drills, the types of questions that we're getting have changed. When we first started doing the drills, it was, I totally forgot how to use this app. I have no idea what I'm doing. Please walk me through step by step. And now it's like, I got there most ways, but I forget what I'm supposed to put in this one box. Or if you tell me what this is, I can totally do it on my own. So folks are becoming more used to the apps and how to use them, which is great. And then we just continue to offer that support, and then we're there. And anytime we send these out, we make sure folks know who to contact and that we are available for them. And like I said, we've gotten more, we're doing better and better. Each time we do this, we get more and more results, and we get folks who are able to do it more and more on their own. And with that, thank you, and I'll turn it back over to Anne.
Hey, thanks, everybody. That was great, or at least for me, to hear all of that put together. I want to tell you one thing and then really raise your hand and you're welcome to ask questions of any of the presenters. We are offering ATC as part of this project. We had funding to do some training. And as I said, the ATC 20 training is wrapped around a state system. So Clackamas County is offering ATC 20 training. They're doing an online course in April and one in May and one in June. And then they're offering the CalOES module. And also we're hoping Chris Wong or David Terry's will come in and do the ORSAT module. So they'll be certified in both. We, City of Vancouver, Jean Juve at the City of Vancouver is doing an in-person ATC 20 WASAFE class on April 24th. So Nels, that might be useful to you. Notifications on all of that will go out in my newsletter. You just need to make sure if you didn't get this, the notice about today's thing directly from me, then make sure I have your email address so I can add you to our list. But anyway, now let's take questions. If people want to just unmute themselves and ask, you can do that, or I will be happy to watch in the chat. Any questions?
Well, while we're waiting for people to be less shy, and Zoom just warned me it crashed, but it didn't crash. So hopefully I can stick around and I get cut off mid-sentence. I'll just add one thing to what Darren was talking about in terms of the configuration. Since the time that we started rolling this out, City of Portland now has mobile device management, enterprise mobile management, EMM, which is the term which means we can manage people's iPhones, iPads if they're a city-owned device. Now we can remote wipe them, we can and et cetera, et cetera. They can remote into them just like screen sharing with some other device, a Windows device or Zoom. And so what we've talked about doing, but we haven't done yet, is actually enable it so we can say, do a little bit of pre-configuration in the app so they know where to go. Because part of it was just people would type in the URL to get to our portal and they would forget the www, and then it wouldn't, and then they'd be like, why can't I log in? Well, you forgot to type something. And so we're moving towards doing that, but we haven't done a full rollout of mobile management for the Esri apps yet, because we have actually thousands of users all over the city using mobile devices, and probably that many, at least, I would say hundreds, if not thousands, using mobile GIS already in the city. So we don't want to disrupt that, and that's going to be a project. Any other questions, thoughts?
And I do have a question. So I know you guys have created the forms for the rapid assessments. Well, are you guys going to work on creating ones for the detailed evaluations as well ultimately, or just wondering?
Yeah.
Back when I was more innocent, I asked Paul to do that, but I'm not sure we'll go ahead with that.
Okay.
Though, Paul, let me let you speak to that, because really it's clear that it's the city's responsibility or the jurisdiction's responsibility is rapid. It's the building owner's responsibility to do the details.
Okay.
So we may want to add in the detailed because we have city buildings that we may want to do that inspection for.
Yeah.
And maybe we have that equip program where people can do their own inspection, and we may want to offer that to them, but I'm not planning on that now. But Paul, tell me, what are you planning?
Yeah, actually, I'm glad, kind of a little hard to hear you say that, and at the same time, you would just have to build out the schema more. You would have, and the form actually has some logic. So, because if you go back to look at the ATC 20 form, there's places where if you check this box, then you need to fill this stuff out. And so we don't expose those fields on the electronic form until they say check the box that says, okay, we need a detailed assessment. Okay, fill in some more information. So we'd have to build that out further, because the detailed form, you probably have seen it since you brought it up. It's like twice as long. So we could do it. We would just have to build it out. But then it would be a cost benefit if we're not doing it for every building in the city, but we're just doing it for, say, 100 city buildings. Would it make sense to do all the work to build the data schema to support a more advanced form, or the detailed form? Does that answer your question, Chris?
Yeah, no.
Okay.
Thank you. And then, and I do have one other question. end of last year, I took the OEM damage assessment training course, and they were using Survey 123 for some of the damage assessment forms. And I noticed within their form, there is a link there to go to like an ATC 20 rapid form. I believe that they have where you can input a lot. I'm just wondering, is it similar to what you guys have developed?
Well, since the person who developed that is here, I'm going to let
Yes,
him
Daniel.
come off mute and answer that question. Daniel.
So to address your question there, the ATC component of that particular form was based off of Paul's original build out of the ATC 20, I believe. So there's nothing to say that in the future we may be able to do kind of a group import as long as the field names match or we can assign fields. So yes, there is a component to it that does align with what Paul's been discussing this morning or this afternoon.
Great, thank you.
Anything else, or anybody that doesn't have a question but has a comment? And I would love to hear, because we have so many different jurisdictions represented here. Does this seem like something that people would have the bandwidth to do? I mean, there's a demand question. Do you need it? Which we think yes, but there's also a bandwidth question and a skills question. Anybody want to speak to that?
Hi, Ann. This is Susie Dahl with Columbia County.
I was hoping it was you, Sue. I was hoping you would chime in.
Yes, I do have a question for jurisdictions that I know that you have the offline tool available, but what if there is no cell service or Wi-Fi available when some catastrophic event happens? Would we then just revert back to the rapid assessment forms? That's my first question. And then my second question is the detailed ATC 20, when those are filled out by a jurisdiction, I know they're more time consuming, but if you leave, I know that the detailed portion that you would leave to the property owner to do would have to be more than likely done by a contractor, an engineer, an architect, because we cannot just take the owner's word that that building is safe. Not only that, with the 50% threshold for FEMA guidelines for flood zones, they're going to require the whole place be elevated as well. So I guess that's a kind of a two-part question, but what do you do when you have no service?
Well, I'm going to let Paul answer that question, but I want to answer the question about the detailed. That's an important point, that for buildings that are yellow tagged or red tagged, the jurisdiction probably does need to have a requirement or some instructions that say, hey, if yours is yellow tagged or you're going to need to get an engineer or somebody to do this detailed assessment, and that needs to be submitted to the jurisdiction if you want the tag changed or if people want to do occupancy. So we're, as another part of this, our BDAP project, we're doing some messaging for the public around building damage assessments, and it's going to be translated into 10 or 12 languages. So, and we have something about this building damage assessment process, and also just generally what we would tell people when they were if they're like me and they are looking at their building to see it's safe. So we will have some information on that, but it's also the jurisdiction's call. If they're going to say, yes, the detail needs to be submitted by, somebody with certain credentials. So we'll have some guidance available, but you guys may need to adapt it if people are having different rules. So that's the answer to that first question. And Paul, do you want to take the
Sure.
Wi-Fi question?
I talked about it a little bit. I can talk about it in more detail. Essentially what you would need, Susie, is you would need to have, if you wanted to do it offline, you would need a phone or a device ready to go with that map. Now, the maps aren't very big. It doesn't take a huge amount of work to provision, a device so it can have that offline map. Because the Survey 123 app has the capability of, do you want to save this survey offline or do you want to try and send it now? So you just say it just saves to the device. The piece that is tricky is then, well, first of all, you got it. It's So you create the offline base map, and I've done them for phones, and I do actually the workstations that we have running at our 911 center also run offline base maps. They don't run, they're not connected to the internet for security reasons, of course, because it's a 911 center. So the trick is really, once you have that, is then getting that map regularly updated to the device. Have your building inspectors, if say they, you have to some sort of confirmation with them of, okay, go and download this base map, quarterly, maybe when you're doing your inspection that you've been prompted by Everbridge to do, go and download this base map and then go do some inspections offline, save them, turn off your cellular. I don't know if they'll do that, but don't send them. And then later on, maybe that's part of what Darren's team does, is we bring people back to headquarters, BDS, wherever their mobile command setup is, because you can always set up, even if you've had an earthquake, if you've got power and a generator, you can still set up a Wi-Fi hotspot and then just sync from your phone via Wi-Fi back to your database. Again, though, where's your database? Is it in the cloud up in ArcGIS Online, or is it running local on your servers? I'm going to try and share my screen again. Do y'all see black, or do you see the word questions, or is it not letting me?
I see questions.
Okay, great. All right. So the next, I had two or three more slides at the end here that kind of apply to this. So here, I did not make this. I borrowed this, got a copy from a consultant who worked for the city of SeaTac. I found out several years ago. He was attempting to do very much the same thing, whereas implementing an offline ATC 20 situation. So what's going on here is you've got, on the left, you've got a system that is your portal, meaning you're running on local servers in our case, in Portland, our servers are out at Hillsborough at our data center there, but you've got a local setup. And then you've got ArcGIS Online, you've got a parallel setup in the cloud. And so then after that, assuming you have that set up, and I haven't talked to this consultant in several years, so I don't know where he's at with it or where City of SeaTac is at. Then you have sort of a processing cycle where you figure out, okay, what do we have to do? We've had an earthquake and it's time to do, what's our process? It's, we set up our workspace, we do some updates, and then we republish. And then basically the crux of it is this little diagram up to the left, which is, okay, we need a response workspace, data workspace, right? Are the city's GIS servers online? If so, then you use ArcGIS Enterprise, and then you do that. And if no, then you go to the cloud. And if the cloud's up, then you do ArcGIS Online. If the cloud's not up, then you're going to do, hopefully you don't have to do this, but you're going to do a local file geodatabase. That's where it gets a little bit more tricky with the offline stuff, but it's possible. So does that make sense, Daniel? Did I ever show you this slide from that consultant? Have you seen this before?
I don't think so.
Okay. But this would be the dream, right? To have it all set up and ready to go. And as I know from working with 911 dispatchers and firefighters and so, they always need to have some sort of backup plan when the phones go down, when the dispatch computers go down. They call it out at BOIC, they call it manual mode, and they actually have a map with like magnets that they can plot where all the fire engines are around the city. So I mean, this is where we would want to have a larger discussion with a larger group as well. What would work? How would this work on a regional level? And how would it work for jurisdictions like Columbia County, maybe, who don't have ArcGIS Enterprise, or maybe just have ArcGIS Online? Could we set it up so they could use a regional system and not have to rely on their own, because being a much smaller jurisdiction, they don't have the GIS resources that say, City of Portland does. So hopefully that's helpful and helps answer your question.
Thank you.
Thanks. Any other last comments?
Looks like Daniel has a question too.
Okay.
If you can describe what might happen if you have an unsent survey and the base map offline has been updated, are there any particular issues that might impact, like trying it? Well, I wouldn't remove a footprint, because again, we're going to have a static map for footprints. I would go by date, right? Whichever it was the most recent inspection would kind of be the one that of a building. Because you could have two different inspectors. Hopefully, though, they're putting the placards up with is there a date on those placards? A room for a date on those placards, Ann?
Yes.
Yes, I think there, I mean,
Okay.
yeah.
So
I'm
hopefully
sure
you
there
would,
must be.
there would be a little working out in the field, and then you would hopefully, you'd be able, the most recent inspection for a building would bubble up to the top. Diego's talking to you a little bit about, communication plan. PBEM, Portland Bureau of Emergency Management has on standby a satellite phone and data connection, whether that would be enough to support passing photos, for example. You can set survey 123 and say, don't pass like a 10 megabyte photo through, make it, smaller. That's one advantage. But yeah, sharing, once you get into sharing photos, you'd want to be concerned about bandwidth on your systems as well. So
Just one thing that I'll add to that, Paul. I know that there's a presentation I attended earlier this week at our conference where they had actually deployed Starlink in addition to the folks going out and using Survey 123. And that included photos, and that worked really well for them. I don't know if City of Portland has a Starlink system or something equivalent to that, but that seemed to work out pretty well for them. To even when the cell network was down and they didn't have Wi-Fi, they still had connection using Starlink. So something else to kind of think about, like deployable to go with.
I haven't heard mention of Starlink recently outside of Ukraine, but I do know that it sounds like there's a lot of capabilities, especially if you stay on Elon's good side. So,
Which we intend to do, or we just want to stay out of his radar.
yeah.
So thank you, everybody. Diego and Paul have so much expertise, and Darren in the training. We did a quick step guide to tell people how to sign on. By quick step, it's usually 1 or 2 pages. This one was 15, but we do have that. If anybody else wants to do that, people could kind of adapt it and create their own. But thank you so much. And I'll if I can technically figure out how to get all the chat messages, I'll definitely cobble all these presentations together and send them out to everybody that was here. And they'll also be posted on the RBDAP website, which I gave you.
Yeah, they should be in the recording, hopefully. So
Yeah.
Kevin has a question last minute. He's talking about debris estimates. The ATC 20 form doesn't really have a ability to estimate amount of debris, but
Right, that would be more probably at the state level or at the city and the jurisdiction level in the county, but I'm not sure how that taps into FEMA. I'm not sure if FEMA cares about that as much as the jurisdiction is going to care about it.
Yeah.
And what they can do.
all right.
Okay.
Well, thanks
Okay.
everyone.
Thanks, everybody.